Light and Magic Season 2, directed by Johnston. For those of you who don't know, this is a Disney Plus docu-series that came out about a year, no, came out probably about 2 years ago. And I absolutely loved that first season. It's such an inspiring docu-series. Like if you love film, I mean, I have no aspirations to do any sort of visual effects or model building, anything like that, but I just love cinema and I love to learn about behind the scenes, and especially to learn the behind the scenes of films I love, like Star Wars or Raiders of the Lost Ark and Steven Spielberg films, like that whole era of the 80s, 70s, And that's what the documentary is about. It's about ILM, Industrial Light and Magic. And for those of you who don't know, for the maybe younger people who don't know, when George Lucas got the green light to make the first Star Wars film in the mid 70s, he wanted to do things that were completely impossible at the time. He believed in his vision and he's a stubborn guy. So he just created a little company and just got all these young people. Like the oldest person was like 27 years old. So everyone was straight out of college or still in college. Young people who were dumb enough to push the boundaries. And he created his little company in a warehouse. And they just were started solving the impossible problems, like how to get certain shots of with miniatures, how to make it look like it's really in space. And they just completely revolutionized film. They did motion control systems. They did the Dijkstraflex, which I actually got the privilege of seeing that in person when I visited the Academy Museum earlier in 2024. And non-linear editing, the way I edit my videos, like that was possible because of ILM. Because before it was an extremely tedious process with film, and you had to completely splice film by hand, and it just was a completely different process. And he pushed the boundaries to create a very similar editing machine like the softwares we use today. And then of course computer graphics, CGI, that's also thanks to ILM and the use of the digital camera. Now digital cameras existed in the 90s and 2000s, but not for film, not for Hollywood. So he really pushed the envelope. He really pushed Hollywood to accept digital, and he'd use that for the prequels. So the first season, I would say I prefer it just because I absolutely love hearing about the beginning of the company. It feels very much like a bunch of misfits. It feels like a bunch of crazy artists who are just, doing the impossible. And like rebels, and it was the 70s. I mean, it's a vibe. If you watch it, you see how it's a vibe. All these young kids just partying and also being innovating artists. So it's just such a cool thing. And again, a lot of my favorite films growing up are covered through ILM, through season 1 of that documentary. And that was directed by Lawrence Kasdan, who's a writer, and he helped a lot with Star Wars. Now season 2 is directed by Joe Johnston, and Joe Johnston is a very interesting choice, and I think you could see his style actually come through in this season too, because Joe Johnston worked in ILM. He was a part of the special effects company. You hear a little bit about his story in season 1, about how he was working on Return of the Jedi. He was working on models. He was an artist. He just was like, you know what? I'm done. I'm done with doing all of these tedious special effects. And he just was like, I think I'm gonna quit. And he told George, and George was like, you know what? I think you're a director. I think that's the problem. Not so much that you're better than this, but your skills lie elsewhere. So he paid for his tuition to go to film school. And I mean, now he's a very accomplished director. He directed Jumanji. He directed Jurassic Park 3. Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, Captain America, the First Avenger. And now he directed this. And I think that's so cool because he comes from ILM. He was there in the early days, in the 70s and early 80s. And the style of the way he did this season of the documentary, I feel like comes through because I don't remember, but I don't think in season 1 you hear the interviewer asking questions or giving commentary. It's just the interviewee just sitting there giving their insight. And here you would hear his voice in the background expanding, asking questions, and give because he was there for some of it, so that was kind of cool. And I don't know if this has ever been done. I don't know if they're innovating the way the documentary is made. There was some pretty funny shots where in season 1 and most documentaries, you just see like a black screen or just some sort of a backdrop out of focus. And then obviously the interviewee is just sitting there speaking with like some warm lighting or whatever. Here, randomly, like they would just be like in front of a green screen, and while they're talking, there's like special effects, movie scenes going on in the background. So at first I was kind of like, whoa, that was jarring. But then they took it a step further because there's a scene where it actually made me chuckle, but not because it was, I don't know, I think it was meant for comedic effect. While someone is speaking, their body just starts floating with the special effects while they're explaining something. And again, took it a step further. There's another scene where while someone is explaining special effects from War of the Worlds, so Tom Cruise, the special effects supervisor, he appears in the car with Tom Cruise while explaining things. And it just looked freaking weird, freaking funny. Um, Kind of distracted me a little bit, but it was, like I said, it was funny. So I just had to rewind it a little bit and then be like, okay, what is he explaining again? So it was kind of cool to see how Joe Johnston put his own little stamp, his own little style on this docu-series. But I mean, it's still about Industrial Light and Magic. It's still about ILM, you know. He doesn't make it about himself at all. So this season takes place starting with the prequels, starting with George wondering, is it possible for me to make the prequels? Because he writes specifically for what's available to him. So from the original trilogy, he kind of like had to keep it condensed. I guess you could say put guidelines on his imagination. And here he just wanted to go all in. So he just really pushed computer graphics to its limit. And Jar Jar, the technical innovation that went into Jar Jar, but also, of course, you can't ignore Ahmed Best and how he got so much hate and how he got really, really depressed. And they cover that. They don't spend too much time on that aspect, which I'm glad, because as much as I want to pay respects to Ahmed Best, like, this is about ILM, you know, not, this isn't an Ahmed Best documentary. So I think they did the perfect amount, paying respect to him, paying tribute to him and his experience, while also remaining focused on why he was there, you know, why his voice mattered in this particular scenario. Jar Jar was such a big thing, you know, in terms of innovation, and in that era of the prequels, so much hate went towards him, you know. And they cover how if it wasn't for Jar Jar, Gollum wouldn't exist, and if Gollum didn't exist, Avatar wouldn't exist, the Na'vi, you know. So they kind of like spell that out, how that progression happened. I would say the major films they cover in this season is the prequels, Twister, and Pirates of the Caribbean. They were a step in innovation and evolution. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to like get in. I don't want to tell you what I learned so much, because I really think you should check it out. It's a really interesting documentary. If you've seen season 1 already, there wasn't that much marketing for season 2, so I wouldn't doubt it if you didn't even know there was a season 2. So check that out. If you didn't even know this documentary exists, check out both seasons. 100% worth your time. You will learn so much, and I'm pretty sure no matter who you are, no matter what you're into, you will get inspired, because I for sure did from both seasons, but again, more specifically the first season. I do want to say that obviously Disney's making this documentary, so they're not gonna say any dirt on their own company, you know, on their own partnership with ILM. So of course it's almost exclusively just positivity all around. But when they touched on Avatar, I did not know that ILM originally was gonna do Avatar, and that they started working with James Cameron, and that they did like the first rendition of proof of concept. Like, is it even possible? Is it feasible to do a film like this? And they did that early stage, but they didn't do the rest of the film. That went to Weta, the people who did Lord of the Rings, and they show like one of the general managers speak about it, and she's very short, and I just want to look into it to find out why, because she just says that it was a big risk, and our leadership at the time did not want to take that risk. And they kind of like, they address it and then they move on. And I want to know more, because like the whole point of ILM is pushing the boundaries. It's impossible. Let's figure it out. Let's take a risk. So that was interesting. So I wonder like who was in charge at that time? How long did they last there? Because they said leadership at the time, you know? So obviously George wasn't in charge for the entire time. George was in charge, I think, just for like the first 5 years or so, you know, when they were still a small company. But once it grew, you know, he's a director. He had other fish to fry, so to speak. So I found that very interesting. Let me know in the comments if you know anything about that, if you could shed some light, but I'm definitely going to look it up for myself. And yeah, again, check it out. Highly recommend this documentary. Let me know your thoughts on the documentary, what you learned or what you liked. Thanks for watching.